Alright. This is gonna be my favorite one. Now, I've really been looking forward to this video because in this conversation of whether or not NCAA athletes should be paid, a lot of times people have rebuttals or, as what I like to call, myths. Now, I want to be very clear up front, these 13 myths are not things that I came up with. This was written by a paper by a guy named Andy Schwarz. I'll leave the link to the full paper down in the description. The paper is called Excuses, Not Reasons, 13 Myths About Not Paying College Players. But let's go ahead and jump into these myths. Now, one of the things people like to say right off top is that, well, you couldn't pay the players because, let's be honest, it's just going to be too hard to figure out how exactly are you going to pay the players. Like, at what's going to be the limit that we decide is too much to pay a player? What's going to be the minimum amount you can pay the player? What about the small schools? What about the big schools? What about all this stuff? And we start asking all these questions. And after a while, it just gets so overwhelming after you start asking all these questions about how. It just gets so overwhelming to the point where you're just like, hey, this is just too hard. We couldn't possibly figure it out. And I say, no, it's not. It's very simple. You just pay them. Think about it. We don't have a compensation committee for lawyers. We don't have a compensation committee for software tech engineers. We don't have a compensation committee for fast food workers. Almost nowhere in America do we have a governing body that decides how much you get paid. Usually it's up to the individual companies how they're going to compensate their employees. And that is the exact same thing we are proposing happens to college athletes. Just allow the players to be paid and eventually the market will work itself out. Will it be messy at first? Absolutely. It'll probably look a lot like a IPO. You know, whenever a company goes public to raise money, their IPO in the beginning is usually really messy, right? Because they'll come out with a price and usually that price is either overvalue or undervalue. But eventually what happens after a little bit of time in the market, that price of that company eventually finds its place. What we're saying is that after about a decade or so, eventually people are going to understand how much it costs to get a top quarterback at your school. But it's not too hard. Just pay them. Myth number 2, a market system will kill cohesion. So this is the idea that, hey, if you pay the star quarterback, let's say $25,000 a year, and you don't pay the offensive lineman anything, well, eventually the offensive lineman is gonna get mad and stop blocking for the quarterback. So the idea is that if you pay one player more than you pay another player, it's just gonna totally disrupt cohesion. Well, that's interesting. I wonder if we can find a sports league where the players are compensated differently and yet somehow, some way, they're still able to pull together and play as a team. If only there was, if only there was a sports league where that happened. Here's a picture of the 2018 NBA champions, the Golden State Warriors. And I want you to look right here. We got one man with his arm around another man. Seem like good friends, right? Well, the guy right here, his name is Quinn Cook. And in 2018, Quinn Cook was paid $14,832 from the Golden State Warriors. Man, Quinn, you gotta talk to your agent, man. You get goodness, brother. Combine that with the $100,000 he got from Atlanta that year and the $25,000 he got from New Orleans that year, Quinn Cook was paid $139,832 for the 2018 season. The man that he has his arm around, well, that's nobody special except for Steph Curry. Steph Curry in the 2018 season made $34,682,550. I should have learned how to shoot a basketball growing up. I don't know what I was thinking. So to put that into perspective, Steph Curry made 248 times more money than Quinn Cook, yet they both look very happy in this picture. Look, the idea that if you pay one player more than you pay another player, it would not make them function as a team, we don't see that anywhere in sports. All over sports leagues, players are compensated differently. We don't even have to look at the professional sports leagues. Just stay in college. Look at college baseball. In college baseball, there's some players who get full scholarship, some players who get a 75% scholarship, some who get a half, some get less than half, and then most of the baseball team are usually walk-ons. Yet, every single year, baseball teams go out and compete and they have no problem playing together. So the idea that money will somehow disrupt the cohesion of a team is just not founded. By the way, if you were that concerned with money destroying the cohesiveness of teams, why are we paying college coaches millions of dollars? Myth number 3, nearly all athletic departments lose money. So if you paid players, there would be no basketball and football. Again, like in the first point, we're not saying that you need to come up with some compensation committee that regulates how much you can and cannot pay a player. We're saying just allow players to be paid and let the market figure itself out. And we're also saying is that you're not forcing universities to pay players. You are making the option of paying players available. Take coaching, for example. A few weeks ago, UCLA wanted to snatch John Calipari away from the University of Kentucky. What did the University of Kentucky do? They signed John Calipari to a lifetime contract deal. Nobody put a gun to their head and made them do that. That's what they elected to do of their own free will. What we are saying is allow the players to work that same way. So if Duke wants to pay a player, but Michigan State doesn't want to pay the player, then let Duke pay the player and let that player make the decision whether or not he wants to go to Duke or Michigan State. Secondly, this is using the little guys to defend the corruption of the big guys. When we are talking about paying players, let's just keep it real. We're really only talking about the Big 5 conferences. The Big 10, the Big 12, the ACC, the SEC, and the Pac-12. That's really who we're talking about. Most universities and most colleges will not be affected if you were allowed players to be paid. Because most universities don't treat football, basketball, and the athletic department as these Power 5 conferences do. See, what the NCAA wants you to do, they want you to look at all the athletic departments and go like, hey, look, across the board, all these athletic departments are losing money, therefore there's no money to pay the players. But if that was true, if big-time college sports was a revenue-losing venture, then why are so many schools eager to get into Division I sports? Look, in 1985, there were 282 Division I schools. Today, in 2019, there are 347. It got so bad to the point that they had to put a 4-year moratorium on allowing more schools to become Division I schools. So you mean to sit here and tell me that 65 schools were eager to become Division I schools just so their athletic department can lose money? Do you really expect us to believe that? That's not what happened. Because here's what we know. When you have a good football team, donations from alumni go up. When a team has a great March Madness run, it leads to more applications and more people applying to get into the school. And also, we're only talking about the profit-generating sports. Again, the NCAA wants you to believe, well, you can't play the football player because then you have to pay the lacrosse player. No, you don't. The lacrosse player should not get paid because the lacrosse player does not generate revenue. Myth number 4, paying players means no more competitive balance. The big rich schools will get all the good players and the small poor schools won't stand a chance. You mean like it currently is right now? Look, so this gives the idea that, hey, if you allow players to be paid, then all the big rich schools are going to gobble up all the talent because they're going to throw out all this money that we thought that they didn't have because apparently they were losing money, but all of a sudden they have money. But all the big rich schools are now going to be able to offer all this money to all the best players. And then the little small schools, the East Tennessee States and the North Dakota Institute of Technology Community College is never going to have an opportunity to get one of those 5-star athletes. All right, look, let's keep it real. That's not happening anyway. I mean, 99% of the top 100 basketball players always go to schools in the Power 5 schools. It's just what's happened. There's no competitive balance right now. Every year, it's usually some of the same teams that we see get all the best recruits. Every now and then you have a Cinderella team. Every now and then you have a group of guys who all stay together through their junior and senior year, and they will get to the Final Four games, the Elite Eights, the national championships, and they'll win. But it's not because of the current system we have, it's in spite of the current system we have. Look, it's very simple. I'll ask you a question. Be honest with me. Like, if you got an opportunity to play basketball at Duke University, or you got an opportunity to play for East Tennessee's Duke, you're gonna choose Duke. That's the school that you're gonna go to. Look, the idea that we have competitive balance and we have Cinderella teams because of the current system we have is just not true. And if you don't think that's the case, just look at women's basketball. The reason why there's parity in men's basketball is because in America there are so many great, talented young men playing basketball that even after Duke and Kentucky and all the big schools, after they get all their good players, there's still some good players out there to go around. It's not like that in women's basketball. After UConn, Baylor, Notre Dame, and a few other good schools eat up all the good players, we basically have the same group of schools in the Final Four year after year after year. So competitive balance might actually change, giving a small school the opportunity to scrounge up some money from its donors to pay a big-time recruit $25,000, $50,000 a year might actually help them. Myth number 5, we can't pay the players because we'll have to cancel the other sports. Maybe. Look, no, seriously, like let's look at this. Let's think about this. If nobody's already showing up to the men's water polo event, maybe that's a sign that the students on campus don't really care about men's water polo. Because inevitably you will be cutting a men's program, not a women's program. But if no one's showing up to the men's lacrosse game, maybe it's time to reevaluate whether or not you should have men's lacrosse on campus. So this myth could be true. However, I'm not giving you that easy of a pass. Because if it was true that you needed the football and basketball profits to actually field a lacrosse team or a soccer team or a baseball team or any of the other men's team, well then how do you explain Division III? How do you explain a whole division of schools that don't give out scholarships and they don't use the revenue from football and basketball to field their other teams? They get it through donors, alumni. Sometimes the kids are paying their own ways onto these teams. So if you really want to figure out how do you field a team without the football and basketball profits, just look at the Division III model, because they seem to got it figured out. Also, let's look at the reality of what's really happening in this. We talked about it in our last video, how clearly men's basketball and football is predominantly black. Like overwhelmingly black, like over 50-55% black. If you want to check it out, look at the last video. And what's happening is we're having these predominantly black sports. Again, I'm not saying no white people play, but what's happening is we're having these predominantly black sports subsidizing these basically middle-class white sports like lacrosse, which I just don't think is right. It's because what's happening is people are intentionally going into poor neighborhoods and saying, hey, if you can get really good at basketball, you can go to college. And so they're having these kids from these poor neighborhoods get really, really good at this skill, at putting a ball through a hoop or throwing a football or any other part of the game of football and basketball, and saying, hey, this is how you can get ahead in life. This is how you can change your family and all this stuff. All the meanwhile, they know that when that kid gets to college, that kid is actually going to be paying for the sports that they don't want to pay for. Because you could pay for the hockey team if you weren't building all these huge, big sports complex. And let's be honest, you're building those huge sports complex to recruit better football and better basketball players. You're also paying your coaches millions and millions of dollars to recruit these big-time football and these big-time basketball players. If you would just divert the money straight to the players and not to these colossal sports complexes and not overpaying your coaches, you could easily pay for these other teams that you say that you need the football and basketball profits to pay for. Myth number 6, we can't pay the players because then we would violate Title IX. Oh, see, there it is. Can't pay the men because little Becky wants to play basketball. See, it's their fault. It's the women's fault. That's why we can't pay them, because it's the women. Because every new dollar that we spend on the men, we gotta spend one on the women. So boom, there it is. You can't pay the players. People love talking about how Title IX prevents you from paying players. Title IX is the reason we have wage suppression in the NCAA. Say that out loud for a second. We're basically blaming women for not paying players. And anyone who says this either A, does not understand how Title IX works, or B, has no idea how Title IX is currently being implemented in practice. So let's get some things clear. Title IX, in theory, means equal funding, not necessarily equal scholarships. This is oftentimes why you have more women's programs, more women's sports than men's sports. And I'll explain that right now. Because in theory, there are basically 3 ways to comply with Title IX. Number 1 is meeting the needs of the underrepresented gender. Number 2 is the subjective concept of progress towards equity. And number 3 is actual equity in participation. Basically, the idea is that the sports participation should be roughly equal to the enrollment on the campus. So in theory, if there are more female undergraduate students than male undergraduate students, then you should have more females participating in sports than you have males. That is the idea behind Title IX, to help women have an equal opportunity at playing sports just like men do. And on most campuses, there are more women than men on campus. This is why oftentimes you have more female sports than you have male sports on campus. And in theory, there should be an equal or roughly equal amount of funding for women's sports as there is for men's sports. In theory. In practice, this doesn't happen though. In 2010, 63 of 71 of the top schools spent way more on men's sports than they did on female sports. But you didn't hear anything about that. Title IX also extends over into coaching. So again, the same amount you spend on the female coaches should be roughly the same amount that you spend on the male coaches. But all programs pay their male coaches more than they pay their female coaches. So let's get one thing straight. Currently, there is no equity in collegiate spending in athletics with respects to gender. Currently, nearly every school is in practice in violation of Title IX. So the idea that paying players would somehow violate Title IX is absurd, because nearly all schools right now are violating Title IX. They are not spending the same amount, roughly, as their enrollment population. Also, if we already know that we're not spending the same amount of money on women's sports that we're spending on men's sports, and we all think that for every dollar more that you decide to put into men's sports through paying the players, that you would also have to spend that same amount of money on the women in the athletic department, why is that a bad thing? So think about it. There's already no equity in college athletics between men and women. So you're telling me that if you paid the players, for every dollar you pay a player, you would also have to put it into the female part of the budget? Go for it. What's so bad about giving female athletes more funding? I don't see any problem with that. But we've got to stop using women as the excuse for wage suppression. Women are not why you are stealing from the football and basketball team. Women are not the reason why you cannot pay players. Because if people were really going by Title IX, most football programs will be done with already. So no, it's not women's fault. Myth number 7, the NCAA sells amateurism. If you pay players, the popularity will decline. Okay, there's just like no evidence for this whatsoever. There's no support that if you pay the players, all of a sudden the popularity will decline. But that's what the NCAA likes to say. The NCAA likes to say, we sell amateurism. Amateurism is the bedrock of the NCAA, and amateurism is vital to the popularity of the sport. Except there's no evidence that it is. I'll give you perfect examples. Look at tennis. Look at golf. In golf, in tennis, they pay players. As a matter of fact, in golf, they use earnings to rank players. Golf doesn't lose its popularity because you pay players. Here's another one. How about the Dream Team? Remember, for the longest time, the Olympics said, hey, you cannot use professional athletes in the Olympics. But what happened when they used the Dream Team? We started to dominate and the sport got even more popular. Would you look at that? Again, there's no evidence for this. There's only counter evidence for this. Think about how many times a year you're always hearing about some player that got paid or some coach paid a player to go to their school. You don't stop watching the sport. There is no evidence that suggests that if all of America found out that the players were being paid, that we would just stop watching the sport. It just doesn't happen. I mean, think about it. If you had 2 tickets to the national championship game at the 50-yard line, and then a week before the game, you found out that a bunch of the players on both sides of the field were paid, would you not go to the game? I didn't think so. Myth number 8, if you pay players any more than they already get, they stop being students. Again, this kind of goes to what we were talking about in the last myth about amateurism, that hey, when you pay a player, they're no longer really a student. Now they're a professional. But across campuses all across America, people have jobs and goes to school. It's not uncommon. As a matter of fact, I would say many, if not most students, hold down a job and go to school. Many students have full-time jobs and go to school. So the idea that if you have a job or if you're being paid that you're not a student is just not true. Myth number 9, if you pay them, then what's the point of academics? Okay, see, look, what this one does is it conflates 2 things together and allows you to think that they're synonymous, okay? The opposite of college is not professional, and college and amateur are not synonyms. Just because you pay players doesn't mean that they become mercenaries. Just because you pay players does not mean that you need to stop requiring them to actually be in school. See, the NCAA has convinced itself and the public that the popularity of college athletics comes from amateurism, comes from the fact that these guys aren't paid. That's why we prefer college sports as opposed to professional sports. That's the difference. That the difference is in the professionals, they're paid, and in college, they're not paid. So that's why we like college sports, because these are unpaid amateurs. But that's not it. And we've talked about this in the first video. The heart of college athletics is I go to one school, you go to another school, and my school is better than your school. That's the whole point of college athletics. It's simply to prove that my school is better than your school. What ties us into college athletics is the fact that we can remember going to that school. We can remember being on that campus, living in those dorms. That's the connection between the popularity and college athletics. It has nothing to do with whether or not they were paid. I mean, think about it. If you're an alumni of Arizona and you found out that the players were being paid, would you start rooting for Arizona State? Of course you wouldn't. You wouldn't, because there is no correlation between paying the players and whether or not a player is on campus. Yes, players should be required to be on campus. We're not debating whether or not players should be on campus. What we are saying is that those players on campus who are providing revenue should be paid for providing revenue. Myth number 10, what they get is valuable. They should be grateful. I wish I got free college for playing a game. Look, scholarships are valuable, but let's say this again that we've stated in other videos. Scholarships are not degrees. Look, no one is saying that they're not getting anything, and no one is saying that scholarships aren't great. What we are talking about is wage suppression. What we are talking about is that the compensation they receive, their scholarship, in relationship to the revenue that they bring in is ridiculous. That in actuality, colleges paying a scholarship is a lot less money than they would have to pay if they were going to be fairly compensated as opposed to the revenue that these kids bring in. The reality of it is, these kids are bringing in more revenue than some of the administrators and executives at the university. But yet, these kids are only getting a scholarship. So no one is saying that the scholarship is not valuable, and no one is saying that the scholarships aren't good. What we are saying is scholarships are not degrees, and in relationship to what they could be earning as opposed to what they are getting is crazy. And also, here's the other thing. You didn't get free college because you didn't generate any revenue for the college. The reason why these kids are getting scholarship is because they're going to make, collectively as a team, this college millions and millions of dollars through ticket sales, through TV contracts, through alumni donations, and so many other things. So yeah, no, you don't get, and your kid does not get a free ride to college because you're not going to do that for the university. But what we're saying is that if someone is going to bring in you millions of dollars, you should compensate them fairly. Myth number 11. We can't pay them because they're students and not employees. Yeah, but the only reason they're not employees is because you don't pay them. Look, student athletes are employees in every single way except the name. The only reason why they're going to the school is because they're being asked to perform some task or some duties. Some might call it a job. And at the end of every year, they can lose their compensation if they don't perform those duties, if they don't go to practice, if they don't play, or for any other violation that they really see fit. So in reality, these guys are employees in every way except by name. They're employees, we just don't call them employees. And so the NCAA has created a rule where it's like, we have a rule that we can't pay players, therefore we can't pay players. That's basically what the NCAA says. But that's like writing a law saying that airplanes aren't allowed to leave the ground and then being like, we can't fly because, airplanes don't fly. Well, it's like the reason why they don't fly is because you wrote a law that says they can't fly. It's not because they can't actually fly. It's just a crazy argument, but people actually believe it. Like, this is like one of the main talking points of the NCAA these days. You can't pay the athletes because they're employees. Yeah, they are. Myth number 12. It would be dangerous to have students with that much money. They don't know how to manage it. Okay, this one is just stupid. Like, what I've realized is just after a while, the NCAA is just greedy and they just don't want to pay players. Okay? Because this is an easy solvable one. And it's really just stupid one if you really think about it. All you gotta do is provide free financial advice for these kids on campus with that money. I mean, you have a team of financial advisors and lawyers anyway. Why don't you just hire some of them out to help the kids manage their money? And here's the other thing. If you were really that concerned with kids having that much money at that young of an age, then you would ban all rich kids from campus. You will write a law or you will write some type of regulation that says that if your parents are well off and they give you money while you were in school, then you're not allowed to go to school. But no one writes any laws that says rich kids can't have money on campus, but for whatever reason, we think it's wrong for these athletes to have money while still in school. And finally, myth number 13. No one's putting a gun to their head. If they don't like what the NCAA has to offer, then go play overseas or play elsewhere. Okay, look, you're right. Okay, no one's putting a gun to these guys' head and making them take scholarships from these schools. But that doesn't change the fact that it's a bad deal and it's wage suppression. And if we want to be practical, yes, in theory, no one is forcing them to take the NCAA's deal. But in practice, it's really the only option for many of them. Many of them can't go across seas to play American football. Many of them can't go across seas to play basketball and things like that. It just won't work. And again, all this does, it distracts from the point that we are talking about a monopoly or a cartel that we say in America We love to be capitalists. We love to be a free market society. We love this the land of opportunity and all this stuff. But what you have is a group that has a monopoly on all the revenue that is being generated by a group of people, and then telling those group of people that there's only a certain amount of money that you can receive from the revenue that you're generating. That's the point. It's not about whether or not someone's putting a gun to their head or making them go to a school or not making them go to a school, or about building your own league or anything crazy like that. This is about ethics. This is about right and wrong. Like, what is morally right, what is morally wrong. And that's what this is about. Just because no one's forcing you to do something doesn't make it right. And that's what we're going to talk about in the next video when we talk about the ethics of amateurism. Hey, again, if you want to read the entire piece written by Andy Schwarz, Excuses Not Reasons, link will be down in the description. Hey, like it if you like it, subscribe if you're new, follow me on Twitter. I'll be over there talking to myself, and I'll see you next time. Peace.